this is Kermit the Frog.
Fascinating.
I'm Captain Kirk.
Magic is always there, as long as we keep looking for it.
Engage.
What does God need with a starship?
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
I protest. I am not a merry man.
Places, please. And here we go.
Down at Fraggle Rock.
Welcome, Doozers, Gorgs, Hamalkian things, to episode 125 of the MuppeTrek Podcast. I'm Steve.
And I'm Jarman, and we are on a journey across the stars to compare and contrast the creative worlds of Jim Henson and Gene Roddenberry.
What started as a comparison has expanded.
And this week we have Fraggle Rock episode, Let the Water Run, and Next Generation episode, Skin of Evil. But first, Steve, I want to hear about some rocks.
I want to rock!
Well, I'm going to give you one. This is That Rocks. There are a million gemstones, geodes, and other things that might be able to be found in Fraggle Rock, and I'm going to talk about one each episode. This week, I've got albite, which is a cousin to sodium. It's a clear crystal that sometimes takes on like a yellowish, pink, or grayish hue. They typically form in granite clusters, and they are used as gemstones. However, they really aren't considered precious and are typically considered low value. But lower grades of albite are actually used in glass and ceramic making. So still a useful rock. That's albite, and that rocks.
I want to rock!
And you can always watch a video of Steve and I talking about sodium back in middle
It
school.
does exist.
Somewhere. Oh, goodness. But what happened this time on Fraggle Rock, Steve?
Well, I'm going to start with, what's up, Doc? Well, Doc this week is fixing the boiler because the pipes bang terribly, which causes him to have to turn off the water temporarily while he's working on it. This displeases Sprocket, who just wants a bath. Eventually, the boiler is seemingly fixed. Doc turns the water back on, only to hear the pipes banging once more. But what's going down in Fraggle Rock? Gobo retrieves Uncle Traveling Mass postcard. He returns just as Red is preparing for a swimming and water spectacular, which Fraggles are coming from all over the place to see. She refuses help from her friends and is headstrong and says she can handle setting up the entire event on her own. The water runs out of their giant pool. It drains suddenly, and it turns out it's because every day the King Gorg takes a bath and Junior fills it up for him. But the Fraggles realize, the pool isn't refilling like normal, and the future of Red's show is in peril. They call on the Pipe Banger, an ancient order of Fraggle who bang the pipes to summon water. And although they bang, no water comes. Gobo reads Uncle Traveling Matt's letter, which contains another way that he might be able to summon water, which I'll talk about later. Red and Gobo head to the entrance of outer space. Red chickens out and finally admits to Gobo that she needs his help. Gobo is gracious and helps her. He wanders into outer space to steal an umbrella. He is nearly caught, however, by the terrible beast Sprocket, but makes it away with the prize. Red and Gobo return with the umbrella to the Pipebringer, but instead of opening it to summon the water from above, the Pipebringer uses it to bang on the pipe, and water begins to flow once more. The Red show can go on. She has her big dive, misses her mark, and terribly injures herself. And that's what's going down in Fraggle Rock. Jarman, what did you think of this week's episode with Fraggle Rock, Let the Water Run?
I really liked it. There's a whole lot going on here. We get more Fraggle lore with the pipe bangers. And we learn about Fraggle culture in that way, and Gorg culture more, because we learned about him like strategizing against fighting some army that we don't think really exists.
That may not exist.
But we got some more good songs. They were all pretty solid.
I can do it on my own. Do it on my own. I can do it.
And we get to learn, about a lesson, about not trying to do everything yourself. Rely on the help of your friends. You don't have to do everything on your own. Be perfect all the time. Red learns that. And there's this intricate system of water that they've created where it goes from Doc's water supply, that goes to the Fraggle pool, that goes to the Gorg well, which gives the king his baths, but also the pipe bangers that magically bring back the water every time. So it's like this whole intricate system they created there, which is really creative and fun. And so I wonder from the first episode, because I didn't remember much of Fraggle Rock, about how are we going to keep it interesting in these 3 little settings we have? Like, what are they going to have happen in these 3 little tiny settings? But they're making it work, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, what'd you think?
Really enjoyed it. Do It On My Own is like one of those songs I still remember and have in my head from when I was a kid. I like that it was about a character, but really was about a bigger problem. Like, yes, no one seemed nearly as concerned that all the water was gone as much as, oh no, Red can't do her swimming show, you know? So that was funny to sort of see. I wish we'd gotten some more Doozer stuff. You know, I love the Doozers. Maybe that's the only weak point. Weak point of this episode is no real Doozer action. But otherwise, you're right. I love the lore that's like being built into this world, that they have the pipe bangers.
Where do they come from?
Ceremonial. Yeah. And how often are they needed? And then even and that was the other thing. I thought the dialogue in this one was really good in that the pipe banger himself kept saying these really funny, like backwards statements and idioms and stuff. And it was so cleverly written that I just kind of sat in awe of it, how well it was written for the pipe banger specifically.
I hope they come back.
But yeah, so great episode. I know we're only 3 in, so we haven't really had any duds, I feel like, that have.
No, not yet. Also, like, we got some Junior Gorg moments showing that he's like a pretty nice son. He's a good guy. He just has a genocidal urge against Fraggles. But other than that, he's a pretty nice kid, you know?
Yeah.
Helping his parents.
Good kid.
Pretty solid.
All right. So what are those silly creatures up to? Well, this week, Uncle Traveling Matt sends Gobo a letter about these things that silly creatures wait out, and they do this ritual where they stick their hand out and then they open umbrellas and rain falls from the sky. So surely that is how the silly creatures summon rain.
Of course.
Well, the earliest umbrellas are actually were parasols, or versions of parasols, used in ancient Egypt, 2450 BC.
Damn.
One of the earliest things depicting it. And where umbrellas, I found this, I didn't realize this, whereas umbrellas shield you from the rain, parasols protect you from the sun.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of always knew that, but just seeing it formally out, I went, oh yeah.
That's what makes them somewhat different, but they're kind of the same thing.
The Aztecs then later on carried umbrellas made of gold and really colorful bird feathers that were actually used as battle standards and carried by military leaders. But it wasn't until the ancient Greeks where umbrellas actually got the mechanism to open and shut with that sliding. And the mechanism that was developed then is very, very similar to the same one that is used now.
That's
it
crazy.
has really not changed that much. In the 1600s, trade brought umbrellas to Paris and Europe from China, and they became really big status symbols. And nowadays, National Umbrella Day is held on the 10th of February every year.
And run by Rihanna because of her song Umbrella Ella Ella.
Ella Ella. So that is umbrellas, and that's what those silly creatures were up to this week.
Very nice.
Dermot, what did you think was the best Muppeteering moment this week?
I think so many of the scenes with Red were so well done. And I think the reason I'm saying this is because I think with this show, we're going to see a lot more understated, impressive Muppet moments where it's like there's a lot more drama and storytelling happening here than the Muppet Show. So like just the way she was reacting, especially in the scene where she's finally admitting she needs help, just these little subtle movements of her head and like turning down and looking back up and like figuring it out. You could see it on her face, and she's a puppet, you know, like it was just like so that to me was the most impressive. Is like we don't really get a lot of those moments with the Muppets because it's all over the top and big, you know, and this was really close on her face, and he made it work. It's like, how do they do that? Or she, whoever's doing the puppet. Yeah. So really impressive.
Okay, so hear me out on this one. My best Muppeteering moment goes to the ships in the bathtub. So I looked at them in the tub and saw them bobbing and said, man, I can't believe they brought in water for this. How, like, why would they do that? And then I had this moment and going, they didn't bring in water. That's someone with like 2 sticks, like making it look like these little tiny ships are bobbing in the bathtub. And just because I had that moment where I myself, who knows exactly what's going on, was tricked.
Yeah.
Because it was so good. I went, okay, the ships in the bathtub get my best Muppeteering moment, because that was just someone down there with 2 sticks.
Which is funny because this is a very water-heavy episode, and I feel bad for all the puppets that were just so wet in this episode. They had to dry them all off probably afterwards.
Oh, yeah. They made a ton of Fraggles, so you got to figure they're like, all right, this is the one.
The one that we
get
wet all the time.
We're getting real wet.
Oh, yeah. Getting wet.
So, Jarman, what happened in this week's episode of Star Trek The Next Generation?
It's a big one for the series, Skin of Evil. The Enterprise is off to pick up Deanna Troi because apparently they sent a ship full of hundreds of people to go pick up one person. She's returning from a conference. But her shuttlecraft instead crashes into a nearby planet. And they scan the planet looking for their life signs, and they find them, but they can't beam them up for some reason. So they have to send down an away team to investigate. I believe with Geordi, Riker, Data, and Yar. And they try to get the downed shuttlecraft, but they're being blocked by this pool of goo, which keeps kind of following them around. But then it takes this humanoid form, this really scary beast creature, and it blasts Lieutenant Yar, killing her instantly, pretty early on in the episode. They take her back to the Enterprise to try to revive her, but Dr. Crusher's unable to bring her back. And while the away team is gone with Yar, the tar pit monster envelops the downed shuttlecraft and goes all around it, enveloping it, and communicates with Troi kind of through its mind. And she's injured inside the shuttlecraft. And she finds out that the monster's name is Armus. And it's a creature created from the expelled evil of a group of aliens that came there a long time ago. And they basically crapped out all their evil or bad feelings, creating this sentient goo named Armus. So he's just pure, unadulterated, evil jerk, basically. And so the remaining away team goes back down to the planet, and Armus is taunting them, and he wants to play with them just to amuse himself. And he even sucks Riker into his own gooey mass. And they can't convince Armus to let them go help Troi. So Picard finally comes down himself to try to reason with it. And they slowly figure out that Armus is just feeding off of their suffering. So they don't decide not to play into it in any way. And so that makes them more and more angry. And they find out back in the ship that the more angry he gets, he's kind of releasing his emotions instead of holding them all in. So he gets weaker when he does that. So he gets angry enough that the shielding he's putting over the shuttlecraft is weak enough that they can beam Troi and the injured crewmen off the shuttlecraft, and they all go back to the Enterprise. And so then they just blow up the shuttlecraft from space so Armus can never use it to escape the planet. And they put a note in the Starfleet logs that this planet is never to be approached again. And then we have a nice scene in the holodeck where the main cast has a memorial service for Yar, even have a recording she made played for them, where she gives each of them a nice little personal message to say goodbye, which is a very sweet moment. But Steve, what did you think of Skin of Evil?
Okay, so some things I liked. Good gripping intro with the rescue mission. I agree. It's a little bit ridiculous that they've got to take the ship back to pick her up from a conference.
Yeah, exactly. They do it a few times in the show. So
feels very middle-class family. That's all I'm saying. I liked it. Not say like, but it was funny to see the biggest plot involving Yar being the one where she dies.
Yeah.
Armus, I thought, was a great effect and delivered an executed creature.
It looked cool.
Looked really great. And I loved that Tasha Yar's funeral hologram was on the Windows 95 background. I like that. It felt very familiar. Some things I had some problems with. A good amount of crew people have died in this show, and Picard has not given a shit before. We don't see any of the decorum, the sacrifice, and do it. Now, I understand she's a main character, but it was tough to know that all these other guys have died, and it really hasn't been that much of a problem.
We haven't seen their funerals, but maybe he was there.
Yeah. Riker getting used as a death pawn again felt bad. Where he got enveloped, but then in the last episode he got zappy hand, we'll kill him if you don't agree with us. It just felt like, is this just his place?
And the episode before that, he was frozen by that drone too, frozen in place.
So it's just okay, when does this end? Is this just
always Riker?
There were some pacing issues. It really felt like the episode plodded along because there weren't physical plot elements to go with the emotional ones. They couldn't get any closer to the ship, and the thing played with them, and then they couldn't get any closer to the ship, and then we couldn't get any closer to the ship, and there was another conversation with Troi and the thing, and then they couldn't get closer to the ship, and then there was another conversation between Troi and the thing, and there wasn't any physical movement to help drive a story along the way it normally would.
I could see that.
The adventure goes along. Then this also got a little more existential than I typically like Star Trek to be. The being is the hatred of a civilization abandoned on a planet to live out its days, like the ultimate edgelord D&D character.
My parents abandoned me. I'm so angry.
But the whole but I just did not like the explanation of it's all the anger and hate of a civilization. What the hell does that mean?
Yeah, maybe if they just made one comment to how weird that is, that would have made it a little bit more acceptable, but they didn't really mention how strange that is. At one point,
Armis specifically mentions the Titans. Like the Titans used to live here and blah, 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 which then drives it even further into that weird magic and mysticism kind of crap. I'm no, Star Trek, pull back. And then why? So then another bigger lore-ish kind of implication is, why did Yar decide to recently record a death goodbye to everyone? Or is this common enough that she just records one every day? Like a fucked up captain's log?
I was okay with that because she is a security officer, very dangerous job. So maybe that's something she kind of regularly does do, but it seemed very recent. You're right. It was saying recent
and
things.
It addressed everybody. So even Wesley, who in theory she's only known for a couple months.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. And really convenient. There's just no one else she wanted to say bye to that was there. It's just weird.
And you, Sanchez. I love you so much. Sanchez isn't there. It's ooh, that's
they
awkward.
all look around which do they think you mean? Which Sanchez do you think?
That's true.
It's
been funny.
So there were some harder elements in here. That being said, I get it. It was her big send-off. Good for her. Walk away into the field of corn, Denise Crosby.
And the Windows 95 background.
That's right.
I don't remember liking this episode much back in the day when I first saw it, but watching it now, I think I actually liked it more. Because I think we talked about the villain looked much cooler than I remember it being. It is silly that it's just this goop creature, but it looks really kind of intimidating, creepy, and the voiceover I thought was actually really worked for me because the lines themselves were very over the top and corny sounding, but he sounded really ominous and scary. And apparently I looked him up. His name is Ron Gans, and he apparently did the trailers for B movies and Roger Corman movies throughout the 70s and 80s. She was a hard worker in the middle of the night, but she found the hard way that working the streets is, that kind of thing.
Right.
And he played Eeyore for a long, long time, which is pretty cool.
I did see that. Yeah. Oh, bother.
Oh, bother.
There goes my tail again.
And Yar's death was kind of sudden and anticlimactic, but I think it kind of worked in a strange way because they get all these big stuff they do, but then she can just die on one little mission. It's just the way it works. And I think it also showed
it's literally never worked that way before, but yeah, it's just the way it works.
Well, other crewmen just offhandedly die all the time, so why not run somebody in the bridge crew?
Yeah, but we don't even know their name. And that brings me back to my point of plenty of other people have died, and it literally hasn't meant a goddamn thing before now.
Because bridge crew are more important.
Yeah, they're but we like her.
Yeah, the rest of those guys are idiots. But I like how it showed the solidarity of the crew, and that especially when they figured out what the creature was looking for, it wanted them to have reactions, and so they all decide together, kind of unspokenly, okay, we know what to do here. We're professionals. We're not going to let this guy get to us. I thought that was really kind of cool. But so this used to be worse in my head, but I actually liked it better this time around. So it's more like a solid middle for me, but not not much better than that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is going to pull middle for me too. I didn't like it nearly as much as some of the other ones. But it did have some cool elements. Once again, the creature was maybe the best creature design we've seen.
Yeah, and there's some trivia about that creature being really tough to make and deal with.
I'm sure it was a friggin' nightmare.
So a little facts here. When Riker was sucked into Armis's pool, Jonathan Frakes, the actor, was in fact submerged in a pool of Metamucil and printer's ink. That's how they made it look black. So it's basically disgusting goop color black. And during a break in filming, when Frakes was lying on the beach covered in sludge, LeVar Burton approached him and said, "Frakes, I would never have done that." That was pretty funny. Picard quotes the dark spirit Demogorgon from Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, which he says, "All spirits are enslaved, which serve evil things evil," which is also a Stranger Things reference now, because I didn't realize a Demogorgon was from that. Armis was originally intended to be based on the Mummenschanz theater group style. So they were going to use Mummenschanz, when we talk about Muppets before, to have this weird kind of creature who dances around like Mummenschanz, but I guess that didn't work very well. It was discarded in favor of a more shroud type creature that it turned out to be. And the director was determined to make the creature believable, and it was aimed to have the creature rise up out of the oil slick, drawing it up with him. And a test was made using a melting miniature of Armis with the intention to play it in reverse. So they'd melt it and then reverse the fluid, so it's like he's kind of lifting out of it, but it didn't look right at all. So they constructed this suit for the actor to wear as Armis, and then they spent a day sculpting the head with the crew that already worked on the show, but the construction of the body was outsourced to an external company. And so when the actor was lowered in and out of the oil by means of a grate under the surface, the head was designed to enable the clearing of the actor's airways so he could breathe quickly if there was any problems, but there was no air tank, so he had to hold his breath under the surface of the oil. And the crew members kept track of the time he was under using a stopwatch the whole time, which is terrifying that he was to hold his breath on this crap. But the oil itself with the printer ink kept destroying the body costume, so they had to keep ordering new ones. They finally ordered backups, and they kept dissolving for some reason, but the face stayed just fine. And so for the final scene he had to film, the whole back of the suit was basically missing, and they had to film just from the front because it was just falling apart the whole time. Sounds like a nightmare. In describing season 1 of TNG and Gene Roddenberry's attempts to push the limits a little, as he said, Jonathan Frakes stated, "I think we took greater chances than we do now. The shows may be better, the level of it nowadays. The newer shows were better, but Skin of Evil was absurd. We had Patrick Stewart sitting and talking into a black oil slick. But what was wrong with that? I suffered physically like a fool with the actor who played Armis. Sure, I'll get in that black fucking Metamucil shit. That was absurd." That's what basically Jacob Frakes says. And last thing, Denise Crosby has said that if she had more scenes like the one between Yar and Worf at the beginning of this episode, she would have more likely stayed with the series. But basically, this is like the first time they gave her like useful, constructive dialogue. And she was like, that's why she left the show to begin with. She felt like she wasn't being used. So a lot happened in this episode, but it's an odd one in Star Trek history.
It is.
But Steve, what are our Trek connections this time around?
Oh boy. Well, you mentioned the first one. Armis was originally intended to be on like a Mummenschanz type
somehow.
Collection.
Yeah.
I'm imagining the clay faces.
That's true.
That's sort of what I'm imagining them doing. It's a sort of clay monster sort of deal. But as you mentioned, it fell apart. Raymond Fortune, who played Ben Prieto, the unconscious crewman that's in with Troy, was in the movie Point Break, which had Gary Busey, who made a quick cameo in the Muppets Go Hollywood TV special.
Oh, I can't wait to watch that TV special.
Or late 80s. Ron Gans, who you mentioned was the voice of Armis, was the voice of QT the orangutan on a weird classic show that many will remember called Dumbo's Circus, which was live action, like people in like character suits.
Weird.
It was crazy. Well, the voice of Dumbo on that show was done by voice actor Katie Lee, who played Baby Rolf the dog on 107 episodes of Muppet Babies.
What a connection.
Ron Gans also was a voice in The Real Ghostbusters, where Winston was played by Arsenio Hall, and Jim Henson's final televised appearance was on the Arsenio Hall show.
Well, look at that. What a connection.
Well, look at that.
Which makes sense because in the same damn show, I mean, both episodes were so similar.
Oh, my God. Yeah, both feature a troublesome pools, the black goo Armis and the missing water from the pool.
I had the same similar thing. Both episodes feature a wet liquid being the source of the strife of the episode.
Armis's effect rising up out of the oil looks just a lot like the trash heap.
That's
I know
very
she
true.
wasn't in this episode, but I saw it and went, oh, that's like how she pops up and out.
That's very true. Both episodes use that same liquid as a way of rooting out their violent tendencies. The Titans left Armis behind as the excretions of their evil and violence, and the King Gorg doing his mock sea battles in the bathtub to work out his warmongering anger. Yeah,
that's right. Both feature people befalling terrible bodily harm that should have or did kill them. Tasha Yar and Red missing her dive.
But she's a Fraggle. She can survive anything.
She can survive anything.
Let's hope. Oh, God. What's that noise?
Transporter malfunction.
No.
Transporter malfunctioned.
All right, it's a part of the show where we transport one character to one episode and vice versa. So what you got for us, Steve?
Rock to Trek this week. I'm going to bring Red over to replace Troy. Stuck alone in the shuttle as she talks to Armis, she would get to do, I can do it on my own, would still fit perfectly.
And then she has to find out that she needs help from Enterprise friends. Yeah.
Right.
Fraggle Rock to Trek, I'd have Junior Gorg trade places with Armis. He'd be all angry at first like he is toward the Fraggles, but in the end of the Enterprise crew would find out he's just a big teddy bear. He's a nice guy.
Trek to the Rock, I'm bringing over Armis to replace Sprocket, patronizing Doc in his tone, knocking off Doc's glasses and then teleporting them around as Doc struggles on the ground.
Please don't kill me, please. That's terrifying.
Pick up his glasses. Pick them up, Doc.
But you keep moving
them. You cannot find them.
Sprocket. I'd have Trek to Fraggle Rock. I'd have Armis take the place of King Gorg, because then his evil would root out all the Fraggles and eventually claim dominion over the human world.
Man, that's the Fraggle Rock episode I want to watch.
That's terrifying. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 125 of the MuppeTrek Podcast.
Join us next time for Fraggle Rock episode, You Can't Do That Without a Hat.
And Next Generation series episode, We'll Always Have Paris.
So from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the MuppeTrek Podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.